Welcome to episode 6 of Reference Wednesdays, a series where I share tips and bits of knowledge and experience I gain from bringing more reference studies into my work. I typically use photo packs from Studio Graphite. So you guys, I got Invisalign last week and apparently I still have a lisp. I have checked my audio and I feel like I can hear it more than you can hear it on the actual audio recording, so hopefully it's not too bad. But yeah, apologies in advance for the lisp. But anyways, I'm just laughing at how many S's there are in Reference Wednesdays. Yeah, so firstly, I wanted to thank you guys so much for such an overall positive response to this video series that I decided to do. It's been very encouraging and I'm actually loving working on this series so far. I actually feel like it's brought a lot of rapid improvement for me and I hope for you guys as well. And in this video, I'll be showing you a couple of warm-up sessions that I did a few weeks back, but never ended up actually using the footage. I want to touch back on the topic of using references to draw your own characters and how I personally tend to approach it myself. So this is definitely a topic that I will most likely keep revisiting because after all, drawing characters is what I do for a living and for fun. So yes, I'll be showing you some gesture sketches as well as the process of a drawing of my characters, Sweet and Zero, who I guess I've been drawing a lot lately. The pack I used here is called Casual Female References. Some of you might see it, might recognize it because I have used it before. I love this pack so much and I used it a lot when I first got it. I did a bunch of warm-up sessions with it and am planning to use my sketches from those sessions as pose ideas for some future character art as well. But yeah, Studio Graphite actually recently released a casual male poses counterpart and I am very, very excited and I can't wait to make some time to use that pack as well because believe it or not, I do have male characters and they are a bit neglected because I just tend to draw girls more often at the moment. But yes, most likely for the next week's video, I'm going to try to do that. So as I mentioned, if you're interested in getting these references, link and discount code for 20% off is in my description. Alright, so like I mentioned in the description, I will be giving you 5 tips relevant to this topic. And I do think that these tips are secondary to the ones that I spoke about in my first Reference Wednesdays episode, so I would recommend that you check that out if you haven't seen it yet. But I suppose the order in which you watch it probably doesn't really matter. So yeah, tip number 1. Clarity of action trumps details. This first tip or topic is a bit similar to one of the ones that I briefly discussed in my first Reference Wednesday video, in which I called it trivial versus crucial information. So to quickly reiterate on that, I basically explained that the process of simplification involves discarding a lot of information that would be considered trivial when you take your focus into consideration. So by information, I mean visual information, obviously. So I wanted to expand a bit on that and talk about the fact that clarity of action always trumps the details or any other aspect of the pose/person in the reference when you're specifically doing gestures to get better at drawing stylized characters. What I mean by clarity of action is this. Upon first glance at your drawing, if you can immediately tell what's happening and what the person is doing, that's a good sign and that's what you should be looking for. The range of what they're doing can be really wide, but generally speaking, you want it to be instantly more descriptive than just standing or just sitting. For example, looking at the first gesture sketch I did, I could describe it as the girl is bending down and holding a shoe. You can see how there isn't a whole lot of detail in the shirt and the arm on the left looks a bit wonky, but that's totally fine. I know how to draw arms with or without a ref, so it was more important for me to pay a bit more attention to the action in the pose, and that naturally made ideas pop up in my head. So I drew her expression as annoyed and looking to the side instead of the less concrete expression in the actual photo reference. This made me think about possible scenarios, like maybe this girl I'm drawing is late and someone's nagging her at the door, but she's almost ready to go, or maybe she's been walking around in these shoes and got a blister and now finally took one of them off and is explaining to someone else that she hates these shoes, etc. I think this is a really important part of doing gesture studies and will actually help you a ton when drawing your own characters. Not every pose is going to give you immediate ideas, of course, but it's good practice to be able to pull them out of thin air even if you don't have a whole lot to go off of. So circling back to the tip about how actions always trumps details, remember that when you're doing quick gestures and your primary goal is to get better at drawing characters, focus on the action and the story beat you see in the pose, and if you don't see one, just make one up and modify the pose or expression to better fit this story beat that you have come up with. This will both make these types of drawing sessions actually a lot more entertaining for you, but I also honestly believe that having a little idea will make you naturally approach the drawing a little bit differently and possibly make it even easier. Not sure about that, to be honest, but it will definitely make it a lot more fun, at least. And fun is what you want. You do not want to be having a bunch of boring and torturous practice sessions all the time. From my experience, that never really was a good time. So yeah, on to tip number 2. Know your character, aka creativity needs constraints. Totally different ways of putting a very similar concept. So yeah, this is a tip that is probably self-evident, and honestly, if you're rolling your eyes at the obviousness of it, I suppose you could just, skip ahead. But something tells me that perhaps there are people in the audience who have not thoroughly considered this, and so I will just go ahead. You gotta know who you're drawing before you draw them. Very simple. The characters I'm drawing here are ones I have already designed a long time ago, and then redesigned more recently in 2018 to be precise. So yeah, when I came up with the characters or a character, I usually act like they're an actual person, and so I do not willy-nilly modify them or treat them as mannequins that are only visuals either. So in fact, I actually hold myself to a pretty high standard of retaining my character's essence and likeness, and therefore I do not redesign or modify my characters, existing characters, pretty much at all. It's gonna sound hilarious because it's almost like giving childbirth. Bam, there they are, and they are who they are. They can grow, but they can't radically change, at least. That's been my experience with the way that I have created characters for myself so far. And it's funny I should say that because actually, now that I think about it, these specific characters, Sweet and Zero, are probably the only characters of mine that I have completely redesigned. So there's also that. But that is in the context of having had the same bunch of original characters for 15 or even 17 years by now. Anyway, off topic. Back to the topic. So, long story short, you will probably hit a wall of boredom or paralysis if you sit down to draw a character you know absolutely nothing about. Essentially, a character that doesn't yet exist. A blank canvas or an empty paper is a very horrific sight to a lot of us artists, and is only scary when you don't know what to draw. I'm sure pretty much everyone can relate to this, and basically the point that I'm trying to make is that constraints are the ultimate fuel for creativity. Creativity absolutely needs containment. I think a lot of people have a strange and romantic but woefully incorrect idea of what creativity or imagination is really all about. Imagination is being able to join seemingly unrelated concepts together in new and interesting ways, and creativity is just problem solving. Both of these things grow stronger when you have a lot of sensory and informational input from the outside. You can't just be an imaginative or creative person in a total vacuum. So when you're drawing a specific character you know things about, it gives you constraints, which you in turn can use to figure out what to draw or which direction to take your drawings in. The more you know about your characters, the better, because then you have a well of information to pull from. Remember that knowing less does not give you more freedom and opportunities to be creative. That's a very common misconception, and it's actually the exact opposite. Even clients often say things like, be creative and just interpret things however, you're free to go in any direction, which is almost always a terrible sign and actually just puts a lot more work on you to solve problems that should have already been solved. So, yes. There is such an infinite multitude of things and concepts in the world, and it's absolutely paralyzing to find yourself directionless and inspires zero creativity. So, giving yourself constraints is like giving yourself a map, and you'll be blessed with inspiration along the way. For instance, my character Zero, the one with black hair, some things about her are that she's more organized and a bit more uptight than the other girl, Sweet. So I can see how she's the one who'd be a bit annoyed at being uncomfortable and make a sour face. And if it was Sweet in that pose holding the shoe, she'd most likely be whining and being cute about it and making a totally different expression and probably a slightly different pose as well. And that's why I decided to use this particular pose for Zero. It was a very quick decision, but conscious and based on information that I already know about my characters. So this is a good place to pivot to the next tip/topic. So tip number 3 is modifying the body and gesture to fit your character. Modifying bodies is actually a lot easier than it looks, in my opinion. This is why you definitely don't need a model or a photo that looks anything remotely similar to your character. If you take the necessary steps to learn how to construct a human figure, you can use any reference photo to draw any body type, theoretically, at the highest level. I mean, for me personally, muscles is currently the biggest limitation when it comes to that. But anyways, when it comes down to is, first of all, knowing what your character looks like, obviously, and then taking notes of what the body type differences are between the model in the photo and your character. This is why when you design a character, you actually have to be specific about them and their body type, which doesn't necessarily mean knowing the length of like every individual bone in their body, but you have to have a very good idea of what will make their body slightly different from some other characters of yours. I only personally compare my characters to my other characters because they are typically within the same universe and I draw them in the same style, and so some of them do actually have similar body types, and why not? This is totally acceptable. For instance, I have another female character with a soft kind of curves type of body, very similar to Sweet, and that character is Noelle, but Noelle is not as tall, and so her thighs are thicker. She also doesn't work out as regularly, and so she isn't as toned. Sweet is obsessed with working out, and she's a dancer. So some of this information you might never even visually see in my art, but if an opportunity comes where that might be relevant visual information, then bam, it's already there and it's just waiting to be implemented. So that's kind of what I mean. In this specific example, both my characters are tall, so I had to make the legs longer, and that was probably the most significant modification. One of them is more lean and angular, while the other has a more curvy, wave-like body, I guess, like I mentioned, and a more bodacious type of figure. So also really taking personality into account, I made a ton of small changes, from hand gestures to pose exaggeration and such, and of course facial expressions, which is crucial. I think this is a super efficient way of using references personally. But this is also exactly why I can draw poses very easily with no references at all. A lot of it also calls back to clarity of action trumping other details. As you may have noticed, I like to do gesture study from the photo first and then use my gesture sketch/study as a reference for the actual drawing of my character, which takes me to the next tip. Tip number 4, discarding the reference before it becomes a distraction. Alright, so you gotta know when to put the reference away. As someone who doesn't like the multitasking aspect of using references, I put that shit away as soon as I possibly can, which is usually pretty fast. I have a natural habit of using references like very sparingly and for the least amount of time possible in the context of drawing characters, because to me, every second I spend not looking at what I'm actually drawing and looking at the reference instead is a second that pulls me out of my world and out of my zone and stretches out the time length to complete the artwork. So I know it's an excessively negative view of references, perhaps, but I can't help it. I take their usefulness begrudgingly and relish the times that I don't need them at all. References, that is. Yeah, so the biggest reason why I think it's important to discard the reference as quickly as you can is for a few reasons. So firstly, trying to pull information out of your memory instead of a secondary visual source is just a very good exercise in general that will strengthen your imagination. Secondly, it will definitely increase your speed because every pause away from your drawing to either find a reference or to look at it is a pause that lengthens the time it will take you to complete the art, like I mentioned earlier, something that personally bugs me a lot. And third, the less you rely on an outside source of information, the more you learn to solve micro problems that arise on the spot with just instinct, or you get the opportunity to use your knowledge that you have so earned from hopefully studying anatomy and such. So yeah, something doesn't look right, redraw it like 5 times or redraw it 10 times. If it still doesn't look right and is totally off, sure, you can at that point search up for a reference. But there's also a high chance that every time you redraw something, you will get closer to something that resembles decent, and this way you will actually give your brain a ton of trial and error data on why something looked bad and what you needed to change about it in order to make it look better. I already had some of these things in a relatively decent spot before I ever did any figure drawing, so you can actually you can learn a lot by doing this trial and error method of just redrawing something when it doesn't look right without instantly reaching for a reference, you know what I mean? Yeah, this is a weird turn to take in a Reference Wednesday episode. But anyway, you also need to let go of total perfectionism. Is something that I wanted to mention. I personally settle for just decent or close enough for many years, and that's actually partially how I developed such a quick shorthand for doing most body parts. If I needed perfection, I'd never be able to complete a drawing. Mexi, please. And I'm sure you understand that. To this day, I apply a minimum 75% satisfaction rule. It helps me keep the quality up to, retain a sense of pride in my work by knowing that I don't half-ass anything ever. But also, if I can get up to, say, 80% satisfaction with an art piece, my job is done. Although, another factor is that I just genuinely love my characters so much that I feel a deranged kind of happiness just getting to draw them at all, which has propelled me for years. In fact, probably has propelled me for my entire art career. But yeah, and I only really feel specifically dissatisfied when my characters just don't look like themselves for whatever reason. Anyway, so yeah, finally, onto the last tip, which is the secret to making captivating character art. Okay, so in my humble opinion, the secret is when the character is clearly exhibiting their unique personality, usually in their posture, clothing, and action. The reason why I wanted to bring this up at all is because I think it's something that's very often overlooked when people put together portfolios, especially these days when a lot of people gravitate toward drawing cute girls from Pinterest. I don't think there's anything wrong per se with doing that, and a lot of the time it does produce very beautiful artwork to look at, but I don't think it's good examples of strong character art or design, mostly because there's usually very little unique personality indicators in there, unfortunately. I think that what makes character art attention grabbing is when you instantly want to know more about this person and you see them as a person instantly and not just a pretty decorative picture to look at. You can probably tell that this Pinterest girl art thing isn't really my cup of tea, and you're probably right, so I apologize for that if that offended someone, whatever. I don't think that my art is always captivating either, to be honest, but I do care a great deal about capturing personality. And from my experience working as a character designer, I noticed right away years ago that the images that gained the most attention and approval from clients and people on the team are the ones that displayed the most clear personality, where the pose says a lot about the way a character is and the small clothing details really hint at this character's hobbies and their history. Even if the task isn't to design some super unique looking character and is more focused on their little outfit or something like that, the pose still needs to be very clear and showcase the personality. Otherwise, the clients don't like it and they don't even know why. It happened all the time. Not anymore, not so much, but generally speaking, I think this is like a pretty huge thing that I observed a while ago. Anyway, it's almost like the client just can't imagine the character in any other pose or with a different expression, so they just subconsciously think that this one image is like somehow the entire representation of the character. Yes, and this is why posing is so crucial when it comes to character design. And with that, we have come to the end of this video. So I hope you guys enjoyed my latest set of tips. I'm basically just hovering around making a video about character design at this point, but I do promise that it is something that I will tackle very soon. I have some ideas. I basically want to simulate my process exactly and show you guys how I go about it, and there are some characters that I need to design for Gloaming Veil soon. Gloaming Veil being a comic series that I'm currently writing and developing. So yeah, that will give me plenty of material to share with you guys, especially when it comes to like visual development and writing and such, and comics related stuff. Yeah. So like I mentioned at the start, the reference pack I used in this video is called Casual Female Poses, and there's also now a male version up in Studio Graffiti's shop. You can get these or any other reference pack from them with 20% off using my discount code in the description below. Thanks so much for watching my videos, guys. I really appreciate your comments, especially I love reading comments. So yeah, as always, if you have a suggestion for a future topic or a question or a story, I love stories, let me know, because I read all the comments and I do try to reply as much as I can when I have a free minute. So yeah, I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!